Hey there, welcome to the Confident Communications Podcast. I'm your host, Molly McPherson. My guest today is Bill Coletti. He founded Kith Consulting, and he is a crisis communication reputation management expert, which means you wouldn't want to sit between us at a dinner party because people like us, we like to go deep, deep, deep into the well about crisis management, and we relate it to stories that are happening in the press today. And that's what we did on this conversation. So Bill has a lot of experience working with companies, with people in high stakes crisis or issues management and media relation challenges. So Fortune 500 companies, global and local political campaigns from the Senate side. And he's also the founder of Kith, a crisis communication and reputation management firm that is its best, as he says, when it's working with established corporations that feel disrupted in the age of disruption. So we're going to be speaking about his books, Critical Moments, The New Mindset of Reputation Management, and Bill offers valuable advice on how to change it. So if you're a leader working for an organization and you feel like this could be a problem, there could be an issue or crisis just around the bend, take a listen. Hello, Bill. Thank you for joining me today on the podcast.
Molly, it is my pleasure to join you. I've been looking forward to this all week, so it should be a great conversation.
Well, I love speaking with anyone that looks forward to speak with me. My kids don't.
Exactly.
So, Bill, where am I speaking to you from at the moment?
I am in Austin, Texas, and my team, we've got some of our team is here in Austin with me, and then we've got a little bit of a remote team. Everybody flew in yesterday, and we had a team meeting yesterday, and we're wrapping it up here in a couple hours. So it's been a great week for us.
Oh, now, good. Now, tell me, so you run a successful reputation management crisis communication firm. Tell me about your business right now, this business model of where we are, heading into 2020. I don't know if the political season has much to do with it, but what is business like for you owning a communication business in this day and age?
Yeah, so it's so topical. That's what we spent the past 36 hours talking about. And so our firm's name is Kith, Kith. We do crisis and reputation management. And so, I've listened to so many of your great episodes where you talk about, where we get increasing phone calls and clients are either find themselves in crisis or find themselves aware of a crisis and begin the planning journey or the need for some sort of a planning journey that's there. And so we balance and toggle exactly between those two places. Mm-hmm. For 2020, the thing we really want to work with organizations on is we're always going to do crisis response, is what we call it. Mm-hmm. We're always going to do that. But the thing we really want to do is transition from disrupting the disruption, which will resonate with you, which is what we do in crisis response. A company is being disrupted and we're trying to disrupt that, get them back to normal. We would like to do less disrupting the disruption and really move more towards how do we transform organizations into reputation resilience? How do we make sure that they're ready from a crisis standpoint, all the normal tactics on crisis planning and readiness, but then how do we do a lot of smart thinking about risk and blend those two avenues together to create a reputation resilient organization?
It's a brilliant business model because I am pivoting into that same area, but not from a corporate perspective. I deal with a lot of leaders and how they can do it, starting with their culture that they have on the inside. So it's interesting that we're both going to that same place because the whole environment is disruptive. Wouldn't you say that everyone is almost on edge? And in our business, we bring that calm and that presence that we want to project onto our clients. Would you agree?
I absolutely agree. And just an anecdote that I love when I think about the construct of disruption and I think about the construct of transformation. And so someone shared with me this anecdote is that, Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, the adage that they do, the mantra that they live by, is move fast and break things. And that has created moments for them. I call it critical moments that have created moments for them where they've had to testify in front of Congress. When Zuckerberg himself goes for a jog in communities, he has a sort of a phalanx of about a dozen to 15 security guards around him. Hugely successful, wonderful platform, all those great things. But that move fast and break thing, disruptive mentality is sort of drives that culture, therefore creating crises for them that they need to manage. Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett, they want to transform industries. They don't want to disrupt industries. They want to transform industries. And that's what he does. And so Warren Buffett, as he travels, is that he'll grab an Uber at the Chicago airport to go to a meeting or grab a car in a car service with no security, no team, and he's never testified in front of Congress. And so I want to help organizations take the best of Facebook, creating something that is so valuable to the marketplace, but creating the long-term value that Berkshire's created and what Buffett has created. And he got there through transformation. So disruption has a place, but it's really much more my mindset. I want to sell transformation. I don't want to sell disrupting the disruption.
Yeah. And Mark Zuckerberg, you bring up such a great, analogy there. Like his disruption resulted in creating this, billion-dollar company. But when you can't be disruptive with your own reputation, it causes too much damage and you can't pick up all the pieces. And I think that's clearly what Mark Zuckerberg, you can't open the newspaper or go online without seeing a news story about him trying to adjust his reputation. So it's a great model.
And why it's so important and why companies need to think about it is that the way I view reputation and the reason organizations need to manage reputation in a thoughtful, structured way is that you get a handful of things. And again, these are wonderful things I think you think about and talk about, is that you're building a reservoir of goodwill so that when something bad happens, people say, well, that's not the company I know. That's not the relationship I have with them. So you get this benefit of the doubt with this reservoir of goodwill. But more importantly is you get this license to operate. So if, for example, Facebook wanted to get into banking, a highly regulated marketplace requires a lot of state and federal permissions in order to do that. They have significant speed bumps. And so they're licensed to operate. Their strategy is to go into banking. I don't know if they plan that or not, but as an example, they are going to have a difficult time. And that's what that reputational impact that you just highlighted, that's the reason why it's important to grow their business.
Well, I think they are getting into the monetary biz. I mean,
the cryptocurrency. I think they're doing some crypto stuff. Yeah, and I think it's going to be a challenge. That's a weird place to be anyways.
Yeah, it is. So I have a friend that just started working at Facebook. So I can't wait to get intel if she can share it with me there. But great example coming from Facebook because it's always moving. Now, where we share a similarity again too is we both buy into a formula for managing crisis. Now, I hear a lot when I hear speakers or other people talk, they'll dismiss or poo-poo the idea of a formula. They say formulas don't work. Everyone has a custom plan that they need. I kind of disagree because I have my 3-step formula for a crisis that it has yet to not prove correct every time I see it play out. You have one, Kith's equation for crisis success. And I love your markers in there. You have core values, which is really important, but a chain of command. And tell me about that formula and how it works.
Yeah, awesome. It is based on my experience. What I've learned is one of the key differentiators between good and great crisis response is this notion of speed, being fast to the market, filling the vacuum, having empathy, understanding what's going on. All of those are elements of speed. You have to be quick in order to do that. You can't be quick. And the way the model works, it sort of works in reverse. The way the model works is that the way you get to speed equals the sum of a crystal clear understanding of what your organization stands for, your mission and values. What are the things that are most critically important to you? Because when I find myself working with clients in crisis situations, is that there is a significant amount of delay figuring when there are difficult choices that need to be made, a significant delay in deciding what really matters. Is it our shareholders? Is it our employees? Is it the local community that was impacted? Is it regulators, the government? What are the things that really, really matter to your organization? So I think having crystal clarity around mission and values, you add that to a notion of chain of command. Too often organizations, it's the first time they find themselves in this crisis. And the normal structures that CEOs and leaders have of they convene their kitchen cabinet or they convene their executive leadership team, and that there are informal structures of chain of command, or there are now new outside players such as outside litigators or outside attorneys, or there's a trade association. There's lots of different players. So getting crystal clear on how decisions get made, both formally and informally. So you take mission and values, add it to chain of command. That, based on my experience, is the best recipe, the best equation in order to get speed, which is the key difference between good and great.
Now, when you talk about a chain of command, do you work with organizations that are solid in their chain of commands? Like you might have a former military in the C-suite and they understand a change of command, or is it always just herding cats? Like, what do you find when you go into an organization, either planning for a crisis or in the middle of a crisis?
So I don't necessarily draw a sort of my window doesn't necessarily look at it through this military context. The way I look at it is that organizations that have either been through this or sat and thought about it, either through a simulation or simply just saying, what if this happened to us? Mm-hmm. That's where they get the best clarity of chain of command. Organizations that are in denial and say this can't happen to me, and then the organization starts playing 6-year-old soccer. So it's the 80-20 rule. 80% are, as you described, kind of not really prepared, and chain of command is the first thing to go out the window. And there's a handful, 20% of organizations. Typically, they're not the ones that call me, frankly, and they probably don't call you. They probably got their act together pretty well, and they're managing through the situation in a thoughtful way. But that's the smaller. That's the 20%. The 80 is definitely everybody running around chasing the ball and nobody really making decisions in a fast way.
Right. 80 is our money. That's where we bank, right?
Exactly.
It's the 20% though, is I find if there is someone who has experience just in emergency management or their military, or they're trained in the ICS organizational structure, like I can spot it right away because I worked in it.
Absolutely.
So again, moving on to, to another concept that you've come up with, which is your 4 A's of reputation management. And I read about it. You have a book, I had mentioned it in the introduction, Critical Moments, the New Mindset of Reputation Management. And isn't that the truth? You always need to reset your mindset when it comes to reputation, crisis management, issues management. But to talk about your 4 A's that you found are critical when managing a critical moment.
So I'll tell you a little bit of an anecdote. So I was sitting with a CEO, a female CEO in New York, and we had just finished going through a crisis situation together. We had done a press conference earlier the day before, and we were kind of debriefing, and the team, and we were sitting there debriefing and talking about it. And the cheeky phrase was said, "Well, that sucked. Let's never do that again." And so that was kind of the frame of the debrief conversation in a little bit more of a lighthearted way.
Did she say that, or did you say that?
She said that.
Okay.
She said that. Which it did. It just saw. And it was one of those crises. Yeah, it was one of those crises. There's no, physical jeopardy or harm. It was just a crappy situation that needed to be managed. And we did it and it was fine, but it was a crappy situation and should not have done that again.
Okay.
And so there was a conversation, and during the course of that, this was a couple of years ago, during the course of that, we had a conversation where I was explaining, okay, now we need to go on a reputation management journey. We need to take your reputation and manage it and lead it. And she is an amazing systems-based leader who I'm very, very fond of, and she does such amazing work at her enterprise, is that very systems-based. And so she kept, in a longer conversation, when I'm paraphrasing, she said, so you mean something like the 4 Ps of marketing: price, product, place, promotion. And anybody that's gone to any semblance of a marketing class or a marketing degree or marketing exposure has heard of it's a vestige from the 1960s, and it's the marketing mix of those 4 elements: price, product, place, promotion. That was the system that she had in mind. That was the process that she had in mind. And so that challenge that she was craving for a model, and that challenge when I got back on the plane, is that I pulled out my notepad and a pen and I said, okay, what am I talking about? What am I talking about in reputation? And so in that course of a 3-hour flight home, was able to create this model of the 4 A's of reputation management so that leaders can actually have a system. Because what's magic about the 4 Ps of marketing: price, product, place, promotion, is most major companies have a vice president of blank, a president of place, product, promotion that's there. They have a vice president responsible for that. The 4 A's, I tried to create a model to do that. So what the A's are, it starts with a foundation of awareness. Organizations have to be self-aware, understand who they are, what they stand for, and really sort of have an understanding of what they mean in the marketplace. So that's this notion of awareness.
Is that just for the company, or would you give that to the leader as well, the CEO? So are there 2 layers to the awareness?
So I firmly believe that most major significant organizations, not necessarily brands, but just major organizations, are so leader-led, that they run hand in glove. So I do it separately for each, but I think that notion of awareness, since that CEO voice is so critical, and so important. So yeah, I do it in parallel, but they're very intertwined in that notion of awareness. How do we become aware of who we are and what we stand for? And there's that mission and values.
Okay, so awareness is your first A.
Assessment is basically it's research. It's not overly complicated. Where do we stand with our internal audiences? Where do we stand with our external audiences? And where do we stand with sort of a third ring of kind of not necessarily the general public, but kind of closely affiliated stakeholders to us? So
your stakeholders.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
okay.
we do an assessment process where we try to understand our reputation and simply ask, what do you expect of us? What is your expectation of us? Because there's an amazing company, Illinois Tool Works, and Walmart. I have completely different expectations of Walmart than I do of Illinois Tool Work. And Illinois Tool Work is an amazing company, significant growth, does amazing product design, but I have different expectations of them than I do of Walmart or Starbucks and fill in that space. So that's assessment.
Well, they fail at the awareness. I've never heard of this company. What is it? The
Illinois Tool Works.
Illinois Tool Works. Okay. All right. Maybe I'm out of market.
High growth, major Fortune 500 company that does amazing work, has a sustainability and CSR platform that's quite innovative. And the reason you don't know about them is that you don't need to know about them because you're obviously not a core stakeholder, but the people that know about them and have high expectations of them, but it's in market. And so it's a completely very, very unique and super smart model that they run. That's really great.
Well, and then let me ask you this then, in terms of the assessment, is any of that scientific? Are you doing focus groups?
Yeah, it's all that. All of those things are in our toolkit, both employee surveys. How are we doing as an employer? Public opinion surveys, externally, focus groups, online, offline, absolutely. So it's somewhat budget constrained and/or what resources the company already has in place, but absolutely, it's a full suite of assessment services.
Okay, and now your next A is one that I like to use a lot. What is your third A?
It's authority. And so, some people would argue that authority should be first or should be last, but I think authority is exactly perfectly positioned. So once an organization becomes aware of what they stand for, can and can't do, then they assess and they understand what people expect of them. It is then time, if you're going to go on a reputation management journey, it is then time to have buy-in and authority from your organization that we can actually do this. We can actually begin to turn this large battleship of a corporation. And that comes from buy-in, authority, and understanding from your organization. We talk about creating a reputation management council, which may or may not mirror the executive leadership team, depends on different structures, but you get the authority of the organization to actually do this, because I have been exposed to too many well-intentioned PR professionals that come up with a brilliant CSR or a brilliant promotion plan around what we're going to do to build our reputation, and the leadership doesn't buy in, and it dies on the cutting room floor, or it becomes hollow and not authentic. And so that's where authority comes in, is that you get the buy-in from your organization in the authority phase.
Oh, and your authority and that buy-in is so critical. And I usually find if I were doing the 4 A's or if I had alliteration, I do have to ask you, did you just get on the plane and settle on A because it was the first one? You said, I got to use alliteration and I'll just go.
No, I just jotted down. I really tried to. I tried to be somewhat disciplined of this. What are the words that I use? And I jotted down a bunch. And I think authority started as buy-in.
Oh, okay.
And then I said, well, that doesn't. I got 2 other A's, so we got to find an A.
Yeah.
So I think I did a little thesaurus search on there, but it was really I knew awareness was important.
Yeah, the 4 J's, the 4 Z's, that wouldn't work,
Exactly,
but A works.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but that piece about authority, I do note going into a lot of situations where the buy-in or the lack of it can be the first challenge that you have to overcome. Absolutely. Is because people don't think that there's an issue. So I love that you have authority in there. How about your last A?
So there is a subtle hidden element to the pyramid that's there. And so if you're looking at a visual version, and I'm pop it up in the show notes, is that there's a solid blue line between authority and the final A that's there.
Yes.
And that is very intentional, because it has been my experience, and I'm so curious of your reaction to this. It has been my experience, because you've been both an insider, a consumer of PR services, and an offer of PR services, is that blue line is the agency buffer, is that there are too many consultants, strategists, agency experts that come in and immediately jump to action, which is the 4th A, without and say, you need to do this. Let's do a better CSR program. Let's recycle a little bit better. Let's treat our employees better and do X, Y, and Z. And they immediately jump to action. And so unless an organization is aware, has done some assessment, and has that authority, the blue line is intended to be a membrane or a checkpoint for leadership to say, we need to go to action, but let's pause and make sure that we're not jumping to action unless we actually know a little bit about ourselves and a little bit about what the marketplace expects, because otherwise we're just doing flash in the pan PR programs. And that is not sustainable. And that is not how you grow a reputation.
Oh, I like it. It's a very subtle graphic metaphor, but how important is it? Because it is like I'm working with a client right now, and every so often I'll get the email or the phone call asking, I would like to do this, or we're forming this, or we're doing this. Like, no. That's too reactive. You can't do it right now because we're still in the middle of planning. So that blue line is really the pause of reason.
Absolutely. I love that. It's a beautiful phrase. I love that coinage. Or I just came from a conference and I learned what Tide, the laundry detergent, I learned what Tide did post-hurricane. I want to do that.
What Tide did post-hurricane? What I thought you were going to go with Gronk.
No, Tide has just a wonderful truck or multiple trucks that they run into hurricane zones, and they do laundry for people. It's a critical need, and it's wonderful.
Oh,
right? And
yeah,
so we've had a client that's in an adjacency that's like, wow, we should do that. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. But that's the kind of idea that I'm trying to pause at on the blue line. And it's exactly that pause that you're talking about. That's exactly what it is. That's one of a million examples of, hey, I just came from a conference and learned about this. Mm-hmm. Let's go do it.
Yeah.
And that's not the way it should work. That is not. And the way I get CEOs' attention on this is that reputation management deserves the same rigor as product design. One of the critical elements of any organization is how you design a product. And there is rigor and discipline. There's product market fit. There's R&D. There's standing up your manufacturing facility. There's distribution and pricing. Very well-worn product development journey. There's no reason why reputation management actions shouldn't be held to a similar rigor. That's what the 4 A's tries to articulate, is a rigor in order to execute on actions that are actually meaningful. Just like, hey, I just came from a conference. Let's introduce a new iPhone. It doesn't work that way.
Right. Yes.
And so that's why it's there. And then so action is the final step. And that's all about, it's this, I use the term leadership marketing, is how do we sort of take the leadership positions that are informed by awareness and assessment authority that then begin to promote over the long term, very sustainable, to actually grow organizations' reputation. And that's the notion of action.
You did mention your book and that we would be adding it in the show notes. So there will be a link to the book in the show notes where you can see on the cover, the graphic that we're talking about. And now I can't even unsee that blue line. That's brilliant, Bill. I like that.
It's intentionally subtle.
Yeah. So you had spent a lot of time talking about that kind of corporate side, the marketing. So it seems like a lot of your clients are in that like product base. But I also know that you have experience campaigning campaign experience. So you've worked in government affairs and that political affairs. The last question I want to ask you about, and this stems from a tweet, I believe that I follow you on Twitter.
As do I. Follow you. You do have excellent stuff.
Oh, thank you. You talk about building reputation premium through leadership. And I'm wondering if you could explain that. And if you may want to touch on someone that could be perhaps in a not-for-profit compared to a for-profit, if there's any distinction there about that reputation premium based on your experience.
Yeah, great question. So I think reputation premium comes after you go through the journey, and it is the manifest of action and that construct of what do we do with leadership. So you're so right on with the wisdom that you share about that. This is so leader driven. It's about the CEO. It's about the president, executive director, whatever, the top of the pyramid of the organization. That is so critically critically important. And so growing and creating this sort of reputation premium, individually led by the organization. When I look at not-for-profit, I take a wide lens and I put higher education in that as well. I think that President Gee at Ohio State University, I think he has done an excellent job of managing his own brand and managing the university's brand in parallel of that, of being a very thoughtful leader. And I know that they are very, very intentional, but what makes it easy for them is that it's very authentic to him and what he believes in. And so he is a contrarian on sports and the NCAA. He is somewhat of a contrarian on testing, but very, very mainstream on the values and purposes of higher education, four-year baccalaureate universities. And so I think those, when leaders are clear on that mission and values, he knows what he takes. He knows he takes his own counsel, but he also has a really strong team around him, chain of command, that equals speed. His premium that he gets from that creates a license to operate, so that they've had some scandals. They had a little bit of a football scandal with some of their coaching staff. They have all the typical faculty and facilities challenges in higher ed. And so I think if you look at that example, he has built a premium that is really, really quite strong. And so that's my broader definition out in that sort of not-for-profit space of sort of looping in higher education.
Okay, so let me just ask you about higher education. I'm just going to have to go back. Are you talking about Ohio State? Are you talking about the fair pay to play?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm talking about any number of issues that are there. They've had a coaching problem. So it's not just one problem. It's a TikTok in higher education. And I've had a president that I work with. He said, this would be a great job if it weren't for faculty, facilities, and football.
Oh, more alliteration. But let me ask you this. So you're saying you're just talking about higher education in general as a client.
A specific president.
Okay. So that's interesting. So higher education right now, and there is so much going on with schools and sports has a lot to do with it. In California, how now Gavin Newcomb, he's writing in a law that Division I athletes are going to be paid, and then you have incidences of sexual aggressiveness, and then you also have coaching. So there's a lot of scandals happening in a lot of schools. So if you're applying, do you apply that same type of formula for success that you have when you go into a client like that?
Absolutely. And it really, really starts with mission and values. And so and it fundamentally starts as though you're a private institution or a public institution. And so the mission and values of a public institution, the things that really, really matter, the DNA, the core of the organization has a lot to do with what the legislature thinks, because that's where funding comes from, as opposed to a private institution, which has a little bit of a different lens in order to do that. So absolutely. I think that is I use that quite often. And chain of command at a lot of universities and being collaborative, thoughtful, deliberative decision-making bodies are not good at creating crisis situations, because their chain of command is very sort of it's a collaborative governance model at a lot of schools, where you've got you got to run everything through the faculty senate and through the board of trustees, to the president's office. And that is not a recipe for success in true critical moments. Right.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I'm working with someone in a very similar situation. And so you touched on in your equation for crisis success is that if you are a not-for-profit or your higher ed not-for-profit, you can lean on those core values a little bit harder because they're in the forefront. Okay, so that shows where your model really fits there. Okay, very interesting. So Bill, any last words that you would like to share with the listener? So someone that might be running a business or working for a business where crisis planning or these critical moment planning's not first and foremost, what advice could you give them?
So 2 bits. Continue listening to your podcast because there is deep reservoir of content that you share. So I think that's a one. But it's one simple tip is that you've got lots of rich content that's kind of, unfortunately, the way Apple indexes is it's buried in the single digits, but there's great stuff down there. So that's one. But 2, it's really quite simple. Is that you don't necessarily need people like us to sit at your staff meeting, whether it's monthly, quarterly, whenever you get your leadership team together, a company's leadership team together, pull out the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, whatever, and say, what if this had happened to us? How would we respond? And I think that should be a fixed component of risk management for any organization, whether you do it weekly, monthly, whatever. But I guarantee you can open up any major newspaper. Typically, the Journal and the Journal and the New York Times are kind of the leaders on this. You open them up and say, if this had happened to us, how would we react? And I think that is a simple tactic that the leaders that listen to your show should be doing to help them get crisis ready and to be sort of simply exercise their muscles around mission and value, exercise their muscles around chain of command, and then that leads to speed. So just simply say, what if this had happened to us?
What a great exercise. I love that exercise. Now, if you and I worked for the same company, I could see you and I all over that exercise once a week, but I don't know if you're like me. If I were to bring that in, I would say 80% of the room would show no interest whatsoever. And that goes back to your model where you'd have to get that buy-in and that awareness. It's like an awareness exercise.
Absolutely. But I think that if you sit with leaders, and I particularly sit with CEOs, and I don't disagree with you, but I think if you think back, and I want to do some research and prove this hypothesis, if you think back of leaders that we know, senior CEOs that are sort of either infamous or famous, is that it is the reputation, or excuse me, it is the crisis events that shape the public's view of that individual. And wouldn't you like to more so than the amazing successes? Jack Welch is a holdout in that context. But we really know more about different leaders in different organizations because of the challenges that they've gone through than the successes that they've had. And so I think if you sit and talk with a CEO and you say 5 minutes a quarter, 5 minutes a week, ask your team 10 minutes, whatever is realistic. Ask your team what if. It's a very, very good, thoughtful, mature construct. And I also had the same skepticism you did, but I've been very, very gratified of the simplistic buy-in of doing it periodically to say, what would we do?
Right. And it's a wonderful exercise. And it also goes to show your strength in the business. And I think you and I share this is we don't say and do what we do for a living because we want to. It's we believe in it and it works. And sometimes it's a little more difficult to get that buy-in, but we want to transform companies and to transform their thinking and their mindset. And that's what your book does. So the critical moments, the new mindset of reputation management, I think is an excellent, it's an excellent piece of work to give to any leader or for anyone to read about why you need to think about these critical moments. So Bill Coletti, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. So Bill, you work with Kith Crisis Communication and Reputation Management. So are you always on the lookout for clients?
Typically mid-market to Fortune 500 is our sweet spot. That's who we spend most of our time with. So yeah, we are always growing. We do have a cap on the number of clients we take on any given time, and there's a very finite number that we take. And so because we believe the way we provide services is pretty intimate and long term. And we don't think that there are Band-Aid solutions because, as I mentioned earlier, we'd like to get out of the disruption business and get into the transformation business. And those are engagements that require a lot of buy-in, and they also take a lot of intimacy and time from us. So we're pretty limited on the number of clients we take at any given time.
All right. Well said. I like the idea about the transformation. And Bill, even though we're meeting online, I have a feeling I'm going to run into you soon.
I
don't know. We're going to be at some conference somewhere, but it was great chatting with you. And thank you so much for sharing your stories. And I look forward forward to hopefully meeting you again. And so everyone, the book again is Critical Moments, The New Mindset of Reputation Management. And I will have the link on the show notes. Thanks again, Bill.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everything that you do. It's great content that you keep putting out there. So thank you very much.
I want to thank Bill Coletti from Kith Consulting for joining me today on the podcast. His book, Critical Moments, The New Mindset of Reputation Management, can be found on Amazon. I've also provided a link on the show notes on my website, or you can also see it on your iPhone if you're using iTunes, Stitcher, CastBox, whatever the case may be. Thank you, Bill, for joining me on the podcast and sharing your wisdom about transforming your mindset so anyone can manage that critical moment. That's all for now. We'll talk to you next week.